Good evening. I'm Alexander Rose, the director here at the Long Now Foundation. And as some of you know, we often do a long short before these talks, a short film that exemplifies long-term thinking. This month is one of the rare ones that I'm actually in. Last year, just about this time, I went to Svalbard, to the 1,000-year global seed vault that has been installed above the 78th parallel. You can walk to the North Pole in winter from there. And I went there with Stephen Rowell from Center for Land Use Interpretation, and this is a short film that shows the trip inside, and it actually coincides very well with Jim's work, who was also there not too long ago. Thank you.
The challenges are enormous, and that we can see we are filling up the earth quickly, and we have today a bit more than 7 billion people, and we will reach 9 billion people pretty soon. We need to feed all these people, and FAO has estimated that we need to increase our agricultural production with 70%, 70% up to the year 2050. And that we should do on the same area of land, in the best case, with the same amount of water. And that is a very, very big challenge. Let's say in the 20s it started with the gene banking. And it spread all over the world in the 60s and 70s. Things happen in gene banks today. We are losing genetic resources not only in the field, but also in the gene banks, because of simple electricity failure, lack of money, there can be smaller catastrophes, so natural causes, and so on, which means that, and these in many gene banks have no backup system, no security storage somewhere else, which is important to have. So we have actually lost quite a bit over the last couple of years, which means that the backup system is very important. And that's why the idea with the global seed vault came out. And it took some years for the world community to accept, with an offer from Norway, to build this place. Today we have around a little bit less than 700,000 gene accession seed samples, representing 228 countries of the world and more than 4,000 plant species. So that's quite a bit. But we only have what is called plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. There's no wild plants in here. This is exclusively for food production plants. Our forefathers have been the plant breeder, have adapted the material here, even if a barley wheat comes from the Middle East. It was transferred here for 6,000 years ago and has been developed here. Who owns these gene resources? So that's an ethic problem, political problem, and economic problem to solve. So, but everyone depends on material from other areas. So it is.
And can you say just a little bit about the idea of the timeline that will, when all the seeds here will be, or when they will be needed?
In the best of worlds, the material here will never be needed. The same material is stored in the original gene bank under the same conditions, minus 18 degrees, in the same foil bags as here. And there they can test it regularly. And if the germination ability goes down, they can request their box back or replace that material. But as I said, in the best of worlds, this material will never be needed.
Brr. Good evening. I'm Stewart Brand from the Long Now Foundation. I'm particularly pleased for this evening's talk because it gives me a chance to say something about the magazine that our speaker works for, National Geographic. I was a professional photographer as my first career way back in the 60s, and I venerated from afar the beautiful photography work and other graphic stuff, besides the iconic maps that were coming out of National Geographic. And in the last few years, they've moved that standard ahead. It's still the best in the world. They keep winning Best Magazine Award and earning it. They have a readership of, I think, 4 million, something like that currently, and earning it. They've gone onto iPad and are looking beautiful there. But also in the last few years, they've brought in first-rate writers from around the world. And so the writing now is up to the level of the photography, and the coverage, I think, of the National Geographic is right in there with Long Now, because this is an entity which addresses the entire world and through all time, and expresses compelling stories, amazing images, and surprisingly up-to-the-minute news across the board. If you don't subscribe, I recommend it. If you have an iPad, start there. We get it every month and still look forward to that yellow framed thing coming in the door. Well, there's one aspect to the writers and the photographers. The writers can write from anywhere. The photographers have to go there, and they have to work with the locals, and they have to get immersed in the story in a way that brings another level, not just photographically, but in terms of the experience of the photographer. And with this very interesting issue tonight, Jim Richardson has been there, and he has stories to tell.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you very much. Stuart, you're exactly right, and on several points, and I appreciate so much hearing what you said, but appreciate being here with you and with all the rest of you folk here tonight. Back in the day when you were contemplating being a photographer, and I'm glad you didn't, because you probably would have had my job by now. I was at the Topeka Capital Journal with another photographer named Chris Johns, who is now the editor of National Geographic magazine that you just mentioned. And I remember times of us going out for a beer with our dog-eared copy of the Whole Earth catalog. And there was something fundamental. The fundamental message was that everyday folk could do something that would make a difference. And I think that was one of the great messages of our age, and it has stuck. And certainly I know it has in my case. And I know that early influence is reflected in what National Geographic does today and what Chris wants it to do. You mentioned something else and about that. And I have been a photographer for National Geographic for 27 years now, I think, something like that. I think I had hair back when I started. I might even have still had those bell-bottom pants I was wearing when I was a young Turk photographer back in the day. But there's something else about that. My wife and I, we live in a small town out in the Midwest now. We have a gallery. My pictures are on the wall. And we have a very curious thing that happens. And that is that people come in and they go down the wall and they're looking at these pictures from, I don't know, Ethiopia, Egypt, Cambodia, Easter Island, all these kind of, they're going down the wall, you know. And you kind of see that they're kind of amazed at all these different locations. And I go over to talk to them, and I can hear the question coming. And one of the couple will ask, "So, you take all these pictures?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And then they say, do you actually go? I'm not kidding. They do this. Do you actually go to all the places you photograph? And I have to say, yes, that's the way it works. Actually, yes, it is. Still, even in this age, it still works that way. Yes, we actually go. Well, that is the point. And in doing all of these stories that I have done for National Geographic, I actually have to go. And that is one of the great pleasures of it. Because I've done a host of stories on water issues, the Colorado River, the Columbia River, Mississippi River, the Ogallala Aquifer. You might not know that one so well. Genetic engineering of food, food safety, soil. That was, all the, Bill Allard, all these other good photographers from National Geographic, they get to go and do sidewalk cafes of Paris, and I do soil, and I think there's something wrong apparently with that, but it's the lot I've cast for myself, because I've always kind of felt that there were those kinds of things that like soil, that if I didn't do it, I wasn't sure exactly who was going to do it. And I came from a farm, so okay, that's my lot, and I get to go to wonderful, fascinating places. But I also, as Stewart mentioned, I get to delve deeply into a subject. And what I want to do tonight is I want to take you along on this story of our heirlooms, our combined heritage of agricultural heirlooms that have come down to us from 10,000 years of human endeavor. And I was toying about earlier today with how to begin. And I thought I would go back and look at the story proposal that I originally wrote for that. And when I did that, I thought, this is probably a pretty nice, succinct way to get you into the whole thing without mumbling around a whole lot. But it would also give you a sense of how these things start with National Geographic and then how they progress to fruition and eventually end up in the magazine. So this is just the first 3 paragraphs of the proposal I wrote that ended up being this story. This is actually the second proposal. The first one was written in 2002, and nothing happened, and it was 2008 before we did the story. So you can get some sense of the gestation period some of these things take. One of the reasons that finally got done was because former editor Bill Allen left and new editor Chris Johns came. And Chris, I knew, had been the state FFA chairman of Oregon when he was in high school. So I had a primed audience there. Heritage seeds and breeds. Our world is facing another different extinction, our heritage of domesticated livestock and crops. Without them and their rich biodiversity built up over 10,000 years of domestic breeding, we face great danger in feeding the world's growing population, with potentially catastrophic results. Generations of painstaking breeding has produced supreme adaptations which allowed mankind to prosper in wildly differing environments and improbable places. Intensive agriculture and its modern incarnation, industrial agriculture, striving for high yields, inevitably casts aside diversity in favor of maximum uniformity and production. The danger comes when new diseases or climatic disasters threaten our food supply. Then the forgotten diversity becomes mankind's last lifeline, and the possible loss would be more than just economic, but the loss of one of mankind's great legacies. And it is. This whole collection of all these thousands of breeds of livestock and fowl, all these incredible variety of fruits, vegetables, all those things that have come down to us, is one of the great human legacies, on the par with any of our great cultural legacies anywhere in the world. Around the world, scientists and farmers alike are racing to save our domesticated heritage for future generations, depending on them to feed our ballooning world population. This is a story of that shared heritage in peril, of the people working to save it, and of the richness and beauty that has been entrusted to us. So that's the kind of thing that we would write to begin a story for National Geographic, and hopefully somebody there thinks it's worth doing. And then I get the assignment, and a writer would be assigned, and we would go off out in the field trying to run all this stuff down. So what I'm going to take you on tonight is a journey along with me on that trip, essentially, and to let you go to those places that I actually did go to take the pictures, and to share with you some of the experiences, but also the kinds of the thinking that had to go into both the production of the story, but also the understanding of the story and what we hoped to convey to our readers. So, starting with that, I want to take you up there where you just saw that Svalbard Global Seed Vault with Carrie Fowler out there holding seeds out there in front of that place. And to ask the basic question, why are we taking seeds to the Arctic? Why is he standing out there doing this? And essentially, that's the question that I wanted to start off this story with, is what is the purpose of doing this? And from there to go on to all the rest of the places. You need to understand that seed vault is a backup seed vault. It's a reserve bank. It's a backup in case of disaster, that those seeds, which are duplicates of other seeds in other seed vaults around the world, if those seed vaults are somehow corrupted, lost, or otherwise destroyed, that there will be a backup copy. It's just like a backup hard drive for all of that information. And those seed vaults around the world where we keep all these things for active use are very easily lost, actually. It's quite surprising. In the war in Iraq, one of their seed banks was broken into by a mob who promptly dumped the seeds onto the floor and stole the glass jars. That's all that has to happen. All that has to happen is that your refrigeration unit breaks down. You lose electricity for 3 days. I mean, just all kinds of things can happen to lose that biodiversity. So we have become very adept with 10,000 years of agriculture in our hip pocket of remaking our world. And we have transformed huge expanses of it to make it into this lush, productive place to grow food for all of us 7 billion people who we have now and 9 billion who we will probably have. So we have remade places like St. Mary's Ridge up there in Wisconsin, or Yunnan province in China, to produce vast amounts of food for billions of people. We have developed these technologies over the centuries to do it. The plow, which is now waning, and then especially since World War II, with the application of huge amounts of petrol fuels, been able to take that and automate it, to industrialize it, to spread it over vast new stretches of the earth. This is up in the Palouse of Washington. And so those basic processes that you can still see today in some places, cutting barley by hand like I saw in Ethiopia, or winnowing millet in China in the wind, have now been industrialized and turned into this great mechanized ballet that brings us all of this food from all over the world. We have taken simple flood irrigation and turned it into a vastly huge enterprise that is very much computerized and automated. Along the way, we have conspired with the genes of foods that were productive for us in a way that has been productive for them. So that if you are a corn gene that is palatable and savory to humans, humans will then spread you across the face of the planet to the detriment of your wild cousins. And that is exactly what has happened. So you see corn that was developed in the Americas, now in the provinces of China. We've taken poisonous plants like manioc and learned how to make it nutritious for humans. We've learned the whole panoply of how to store it against bad times, how to avoid starvation. We've domesticated all kinds of animals, dogs 12,000 years ago. By the way, as we go through this little presentation tonight, you're going to see up there, you see dogs 12,000 years ago. That's how long we have been partners with these plants and animals. They are very much on the same trajectory as us, and we are very much in a dance, a partnership, a conspiracy between the two of us that is mutually beneficial. Dogs, 12,000 years ago. Cattle, 10,000 years. We've been working with cattle. We haven't quite domesticated them entirely yet. They're still a nasty bunch sometimes. I about got gored by that guy who had just sold at the Goro cattle market in Ethiopia. Chickens goes back to about 8,000 years. Horses here seen in the Sandhills, Nebraska, about 6,000 years. We've been in partnership with them. Camels, about 4,000 years. Llamas, about 6,500 years. One of the few animals domesticated in the Americas, which never really had good candidates for animal domestication very much. And we have made for ourselves a cornucopia. As you can see there at Seed Savers Exchange up in Decorah, Iowa, which has thousands and thousands of fruits and vegetables available to its members. Any members of Seed Savers Exchange out there? Oh, good for you. All right, you get extra points. A cornucopia of all this stuff, you know. And you have to ask the basic question, which when I initially proposed the story, it's what nagged at me, because I was proposing this story about all of these heirloom vegetables and nice livestock breeds and all this without having the fundamental idea in my mind, why does this matter? Why do we really need all these myriad varieties of tomatoes and cucumbers and cattle and rabbits and all the rest of this? What is the point of having all of this stuff? And why do we care? Well, first, let me just explain one thing here about where we were and where we are now. So, 10,000 years. For 9,900 of those years, we were building up variety in domesticated crops and livestock. This whole wealth of adaptations about specific solutions to very specific problems. Crops that would grow in this specific place efficiently. Animals that did well in those particular hills. All that kind of stuff was a great, very precise adaptation to place, an actual economy, an actual efficiency. There's little data on how much we have lost, but for 9,900 years, we were building that up, and then roughly in 1900, we started throwing it away in vast quantities, throwing it out about as fast as we could. So just to give you some idea, take lettuce. In 1903, in the United States, there were 497 varieties of lettuce that gardeners and farmers could grow. And by 1983, there were 36 left. Sweet corn, there were 307 varieties, 12 left. Peas, 408 varieties, 25 left. Tomatoes, 408 varieties of tomatoes. Think of that. 79 left by 1983. It's a trend. Notice we're throwing all this stuff away at vast quantity. Cabbages, 544 varieties down to 28. Now, the actual precise numbers of those may be varied, but the overall trend is not changed by that at all. We are throwing away vast quantities of all this. Here's another way of looking at it. This is the graphic that we did for the magazine. On the top side there, above the line, is 1903. That's the bulk of all of those crops. What have we got there? beets, cabbage, sweet corn, lettuce, muskmelon, okay, all right? Below the line, 1983, is what we have left. It gives you a graphic, weighted sort of look at how much we have lost. So, 95% gone. That's a huge loss. So, in what cases do you care? Why does this end up mattering? Well, if you were to go to where some of those grains came from that we depend upon, for instance, Ethiopia, many of the domesticated grains that we depend on every day, you know, I went over to the green restaurant and had lunch. I was eating wonderful bread there. All that, many of that, the grains in that bread started their life in somewhere around Ethiopia and Eastern Africa. So, what has happened then is those grains then have been taken all over the world, and we have basically taken prairies and turned them into bread baskets, replacing perennial grains, perennial grasses with another grass, annual grains, like wheat. And you can always think, whenever you hear anybody say the word breadbasket, what they also mean when they are saying that is destroyed prairie. That's essential what you mean, wherever you go. I ate that bread today too. I want that breadbasket, you know. But that's what we've been doing in remaking the surface of the earth. So, okay. So now you've got grains growing. What used to be a polyculture with lots of diversity now have become a monoculture with very little diversity. And if you should get a disease that comes into that, that monoculture is highly, highly susceptible. For instance, this is one, UG99. Remember that name. It is a wheat stem rust that developed in Uganda, hence the name, in 1999. Was first found in Uganda in 1999. Wheat stem rust. That's what it looks like. What the effect is that when you take that head of grain and you rub it between your hands, there's hardly any grain there. It's about 80% destructive to wheat that it infests. So this stuff then starts spreading, and is already spread to Yemen through the pollen being carried in the wind. And if it gets to India, then you're talking about a country of 1 billion people losing 80% of its wheat. Well, that's pretty bad stuff, all right? So if that happens, then what do you do about it? Well, here's what you do, is you hope that somebody around the world has kept those 200,000 accessions of wheat that are in seed banks all around the world. And then you go out and you start growing that wheat and infesting it with that UG99 and seeing if any of those 200,000 accessions of wheat in seed banks are resistant. And when you find it and you get it bred into the world's wheat supply, then you start spreading it around the world to all the farmers, and they start planting this resistant wheat. That's 10 to 20 years if you really work at it. It's very dangerous stuff, and this stuff is spreading around the world. I want to just take a moment here to read you something. When I was muddling around with this last night, I found a quote about UG99 and this. This is just this is the arcane world that these guys live in who do this sort of work. Hebert et al. Reported that the accession of wheat cultivar Webster RL 6201, maintained at the Cereal Research Center in Winnipeg, Canada, has a locus of resistance to TTK-SK, that's UG99, temporarily designated SR Web, whatever that means, that maps near SR9 on chromosome 2BL. Webster is known to carry the recessive gene SR30 on chromosome 5DL, which is also present in accession RL 6201. You got that? Okay, are you keeping up here? Conferring resistance to the North American race TPMK, but not to TTK-SK. Got that? Interestingly, the accession of Webster maintained at the, get this, The accession of Webster maintained at the Cereal Disease Laboratory in St. Paul, Minnesota, is not resistant to TTKSK, suggesting that at least these two accessions are genetically different. So they thought they had one of those 200,000 accessions of wheat in these seed banks, and they're actually different. So now they got 200,001 accessions of wheat. So they're figuring this out as they go along. So does this matter? Yeah, it matters a lot. If you go to the Famine Memorial in Dublin, and you think back to that story of 1846-47, where the Irish population had ballooned because potatoes had been brought from Peru, and for a century, all this population was getting a great deal more food, and the population had grown. And then in 1846, a potato blight came in because there were only 2 varieties of potatoes being grown in Ireland. And within a year and a half, 1 million Irish people were dead. Yeah, that stuff matters because they didn't have the diversity of all those potatoes, to actually be able to have that potato crop resistant to this one blight. These things happen in our world, and UG99 is one of those things that can happen. So once again, how much have we lost? 75% of agricultural genetic diversity since 1900. In India, 30 to 50 rice varieties survived from 30,000. That's a stunning number, isn't it? 10,000 U.S. apple varieties were lost. In 1900, there were roughly 10, maybe 11,000 apple varieties in the United States, and now there are about 900. I had a nice dessert with a pippin apple over there today, and just think about how many apple varieties are now gone. 50% of Europe's livestock breeds lost since 1900. All of those were some specific adaptation. So how did we create this diversity? Where did all this stuff come from? Well, as it turns out, the invention of agriculture was not exactly a direct invention. You don't have to do very much. You just have to take plants and plant their seeds, and you, by picking those particular seeds, will automatically do a lot of the work of the invention, quote, of agriculture. It happened over maybe 1,000 years, 2,000 years. It happened gradually in a number of places. But one of the places that it happened was corn. Corn originally came from teosinte, and that which looks like this, and a later mutant version, halfway sort of towards corn, starts to look like this. And a century or a millennia or so later, you got corn that looks like this. And then, for the next 7,000 years, we breed corn over and over, and we end up with this incredible variety of stuff. Just amazing variety from all over the world, including you end up with this. You end up with a corn that has an individual husk for each kernel, for crying out loud. So think about the amount of variety that is in all of these things that we've gotten. How do we save it? That's the rest of the presentation here tonight. What do we do to do that? Well, you take all those corn. That's where I photographed those, up there at the North Central Plant Introduction Station in Ames, Iowa. And you go in there and you can walk down the halls, and there are tens of thousands of jars full of corn seeds from around the world. And you just store them away. So a seed bank, this is what a seed bank looks like. You notice the film from inside this Svalbard seed bank, it looked like a warehouse, didn't it? With a warehouse with a refrigerator in it. That's kind of what it was, And that's pretty much all it is. And they're just boxes up on the shelves of seeds from all over the world, about 500,000 of them there. Or it's always some sort of cold storage to keep them vital as long as possible. This is from Seed Savers up in Decorah, Iowa. This is out at the National Center for Genetic Resources Preservation in Fort Collins, where they are doing some cryogenic storage. There's cryogenic storage all over the world. Or it may look just something as simple as that. A farmer cooperative seed bank in Ethiopia is basically it's jars of seeds on the shelf. But having those when you need them is key to all of that. But the seeds won't stay viable forever. So you have to grow them out every once in a while. Varies with the plants. Some of them are every 7 or 8 years, some of them 10 to 20 years, some of them somewhat longer. But you're going to have to grow them out and replenish those seeds with new seeds. Even up in Svalbard, there's a limit. You can't just stick them in there and come back 500 years later. You're going to have to keep recycling those seeds into there. So you're going to have to grow them out, see if they will still sprout, essentially. Or you may have to do this. This is what they do up there in Ames with sunflowers. You can't have bees coming from this sunflower over here over to this sunflower and pollinating it. So you grow all your sunflowers in a cage. Hundreds of cages all over, and therefore you have to have a beekeeper, and he goes around, he takes bees to each one of those cages to make sure that sunflower isn't getting pollinated by its neighbor. Apples are a little different. You can't do that. You can't just keep the seeds. Apples have to be grafted. So basically the only way you keep apples is you keep the orchard. And you keep growing, grafting off of those. All those strange apples. These are not cherries. These are apples in an orchard up there in Decorah with about 700 varieties of the 900 left in the United States. And then there's these curious stories about how things become preserved. Diane Wheely at Seed Savers grew at Seed Savers some of her Grandpa Ott's morning glories. And then Seed Savers started making them available to their members. Grandpa Ott came from Europe, brought the seeds with him from Europe. They grow them out in Decorah, Iowa. Then they start making them available. When she goes back home, she finds people there growing Grandpa Ott's morning glories because they got them from their seed bank in Decorah, Iowa, back in Europe. So the whole thing is rife with these very particular kinds of stories and very dependent upon individual people continuing to grow them out. That is highly critical, is that they stay in the culture. Somehow they have to be useful. People within the business say, you know, like with livestock, you have to eat them to save them. You know, if you don't, if these breeds have no use to anyone, then they will not be saved. So I was fascinated when I found out that they had their tomato day coming up at Seed Savers, because all of a sudden they were going to have like 47 varieties of tomatoes laid out, and they were going to have all these people going through. Now this is photographer heaven when you're doing a story like this, because somebody's actually going to be doing something, and here were all these people going through there tasting 47 varieties. I hoop and holler in the office. My wife is used to this. I'm over there doing research on trying to figure out how to photograph a story like this, you see, and I'll get off the phone having learned that they were going to have a tomato day, you know. Man, I'm thrilled. This is big time stuff, folks, you know. I love it. Yeah, so here, you know, there's just these little kind of everyday life things are going to happen in front of me, you know, and it's going to tell this story of this tomato. That's what I get juiced on. Or that they're going to have this, you know, this is growing potatoes. I hope I'm right on that. Potatoes and in tissue culture. Potatoes, of course, you don't have seeds. You can't do that. So you're either going to have to do tissue culture, or you're going to have to somehow maintain that diversity at the location, hopefully, where they came from. So I want to take you right now to where they came from in Peru. And because potatoes are one of those great crops that provide vast amounts of food. This is a little map of those centers of diversity, the centers of origin of most of our domesticated crops. Notice, if you will, that the north, they're Europe, North America, Russia, all those bread baskets are pretty weak. They are poor in genes, as they say. The South is rich in genes. That is where the major bit of this traffic has gone on, transferring genes from essentially the South, and that's an overgeneralization, I know, from the South to the North. So this is Peru. This is up in the Andes at 14,000 feet. I'm out with a family harvesting potatoes. Antonia and Mariano took me out there. These are potato fields in the high Andes at 14,000 feet. As global warming continues, these potato fields go further up the hillsides as lower properties become more valuable for other crops, basically invading areas of high mountain prairies up there. But this is essentially it. So in this little field that you see coming up the valley there, they were growing 400 varieties of potatoes. I saw a field of 2 acres where they were growing 400 varieties of potatoes in one field, all together, you know, not in rows divided up, all together, you know, and it was just, we didn't do that way in Kansas. You know, we had wheat over here and we had corn over there, you know, and soybeans over there. No, we didn't mix these things up. Totally mixed up, and which is where all this variety comes from. Then I went back with them where they were taking them back down to their house and storing them in piles outside of their house, performing the Papawata ceremony, which is as a nice little ceremony for the spirits of the potatoes that got left back in the field. You know, so that the spirits should come down here, you know, and be part of the potatoes that are here. It's very much part of the culture. And if you can maintain the culture, you can maintain the potatoes, because they grow 1,300 varieties of potatoes there, and they depend on 13. I'm going to show you just a few of them. This guy was a guardian of the potatoes, a spiritual leader, and basically his job in the community was to know the stories of all these potatoes and what their uses were and how they fit in. So you think you've seen potatoes. Well, there are huge numbers, 1,300 I say, you know. Beautiful, odd, quirky things, and they all have names and they all have stories. You know, this potato got its name because it looked like a bull's horn. And this potato doesn't die in frost, and it's using it at weddings and fiestas. And this one is for everyday consumption, and this one has the appearance of a whip, and that's where it got its name. And this one's used at weddings and festivals as well. And this one has a name because it's ashes of the soul. It's color like kind of the ashes that come from burning of a body. I don't know that business myself, but they apparently do that kind of thing. And the paw of the puma, it looks like that, you know. So multiply this. I'm going to show you, 8 or 10 of these things. Carry that on to 1,300 varieties, and they all have names, and they all have uses. This is the great one. This one, its name means, yeah, the potato that makes the mother-in-law cry, and the daughter-in-law cry, because you see it's so hard to peel that the mother-in-law will be looking over. You see, you know. So they all have names and specific uses and places in the culture, and they are all very much part of that. Saving livestock is a different matter. I went to the Royal Welch Show because I wanted to see this, that these cattle who we've been hanging around with for 10,000 years have become part of the family. Really, you know. I mean, I like these guys standing there with the cows, and I can't tell who's happier. You know, they're all just there at the fair, and they're having a great time, you know, and they're showing off. Everybody's showing off, you know, and they just love it, you know. Or out there, our partnership with horses. Out there, here I am on a windmill up in the Sandhills, Nebraska, and they're coming in from branding, and they've all gathered around for a little moment, and the horses are sharing the water. And you know that the horses feel good. And we feel good. And we feel good in this partnership. We have developed as a species in partnership with these animals, and they are very close to us. Goats for 9,000 years. And here's this guy out there waiting for breakfast in the morning with his goat in his arms, you know. I grew up on a farm. I remember holding little Jersey calves in my arms, you know, and it was such a wonderful, warm feeling, you know. Chickens for 10,000 years, so that a girl out here on a farm in California, you know, can hold that chicken, you know, and that's going to be with her the rest of her life. Those kind of moments of when she did that, you know. This woman with her duck. You know, she didn't really want to stop for a photograph, but I got her to, and I'm so glad I did, you know. You know, she just looks wonderful with her duck, you know. Or this girl with a rabbit. Rabbit's only 700 years. We hadn't been long that. But up here in South Dakota, and there she was just lost in this moment of a summer afternoon with her rabbits, you know. And there was something very touching to me about that. There are all kinds of species. For instance, photographers, we've only been domesticated for about 150 years. And we're not fully domesticated yet, so don't let us into the living room, okay? Yeah. These were the folks I was looking for. These are the folks who have made this happen. So guys like these buyers at the Goro cattle market in Ethiopia are exactly the same guys as these guys at the Royal Welsh Show in Wales. They have, for 10,000 years, been looking at all these details of these animals. The curve of the back of the horse, the width of the hooves of the cattle, the amount of milk they can produce on a certain available forage. And when we lose those breeds, we also lose those generations and generations of knowledge that comes from these people who have passed it on and on and on. So these guys are passing it on to those kids, and they are absorbing it almost organically as part of our human heritage, and it's the way that the mechanism happens. So yes, you have all these cattle, and they are bred for very specific places. Like these Welsh black cattle were being moved back into Snowdonia National Park up there in Wales because they could keep certain kinds of invasive plants at bay in ways that couldn't be done otherwise. But they also have this nice trait. They're very defensive. They're nice enough as long as you don't get around their calves. Well, that's what you want in a cow that's out on the hills of Snowdonia. You want somebody who's gonna come after you if you go after the calf. You want that. In the third world, people don't get to maximize for one variable. They don't get, as we have done, say, in dairy cattle, to use only one breed because it produces maximum milk. They have to have cattle that will produce meat, labor, milk, and probably warmth in the winter. I mean, there are all these things that have to come together in order to make a balanced animal that will be economic and productive. They have to be multi-purpose. And that's a much more difficult thing to do than the simple, sophisticated industrial agriculture kind of thing that we do in the developed world. And so that knowledge, those guys have been watching, those women have been watching, all those generations, comes very much into play about exactly what kind of animal do we want. This is an interesting recent example. The shekos turned out to be resistant to the diseases carried by the tsetse fly. There were only 24 of them when they discovered this, and now they have started a breeding program and seeing if they can transfer that to other cattle. That's a very valuable thing to have in those areas. So all those cattle have their stories to tell. They are all valuable in various places. They are all specifically adapted to very precise worlds. And this is what's been happening there. Sheep, there were 1,659 total breeds, and 181 of those are now extinct. And those sheep wonderfully adapted to all these particular places. I went to Wales, and I went to different places where they were raising sheep. I went there to see Lynn Williams and his hill radners, because in Wales, you know, hilly Wales, so you have sheep that are bred for the high areas of the hills, the mid areas of the hills, the low areas of the hills. And they're all very, very proud of them, of course. So this is Lynn and his hill radners. This is Hugh Evans and his Llanwedig sheep. That farm is the #1 flock in the flock book, means that they were developed right there at that, you know. We called, my friend Jim Turner and I, who was my assistant on this, we called Hugh the Particular, because I'm over there taking pictures of him, and he's getting this sheep all lined up, you see, for this photograph, and he's looking at the sheep, and I go click, 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 and he turns to me and he says, "There's no use photographing them if they're not standing right," you know, and he just, you know, "Oh, sorry," you know, and then I backed off a bit. he wants them to be right. It's in his genes that he wants them to be precisely the right sheep and never to be seen in a bad light, you know. That's exactly the whole kind of things. These guys, Kerry Hills, there's a town named Kerry, and there are Kerry Hills sheep there. These sheep, they get to eat the lawn. You know, these are the kind of sheep that, oh, what's his name? Lord Grantham in Downton Abbey. You know, Lord Downton, okay, yeah, okay. He'd have these sheep. They're pretty sheep, you know, they get to eat niceness. Okay, these sheep don't. These are North Ronaldsay sheep, and they get to eat seaweed. You know, that's they live on North Ronaldsay, which is 4 miles long and 2 miles wide. It's up in the Orkney Islands. And there's a fence on the island, a stone fence. And the purpose of the fence is to keep the sheep out on the beach and not let them on the pasture. So force them to eat the seaweed. But think about that. These are sheep who can eat salt water-laden seaweed and prosper. That's kind of a valuable little thing to have in your quiver. Pigs. 711 breeds and 148 are now extinct. I like this particular pig. I'm the devious photographer, you know. I see the farmer, he's standing here like this, and the pig is kind of going like this, you know. And I thought, that's a nice little ballet between us, isn't it? Yeah, you know. That's the way photographers think, you know. We're a strange bunch. We're a strange species in ourselves. But that particular breed, the Welsh White Hogs, were born to be long so that when you had a big litter of pigs, the sow could nurse all those pigs, you know, sort of in line, you know, all right? This is the kind of thing these people look for. I remember standing and listening to a guy talk, and they're saying, you know, talking about sheep, and you see that sheep, and the guy says, you see that sheep over there? He's got that black mark on his left shoulder. It looks kind of like a heart. And he says, yeah. And he says, I'll bet you I can move it to his rump in 4 generations. No, he said, you can't. No, take 5 at least. You take 5 at least. You know, you're on, you know. These guys do this for sport. This is fun, you know. This is what we lose if we lose not just the breeds, but we lose the people. We lose the knowledge. Chickens are fun, of course. There were 963 of them, and we lost 38 or 48 are extinct. Yeah, Grantham, Lord Grantham, he'd have these, the silver grey Dorking, you know, the oldest British breed, you know, and they have 5 toes rather than 4. Now, who would have thought that? 5 toes on a chicken, you know? These were all taken at Tatton Park, which is it's kind of like Downton Abbey. It's a great old estate farm, and they have a great collection of heirloom chickens there. So, yeah, all these strange Orpingtons, you know, and Hamburg Bantams, and they all have some particular history. They were raised for some particular place, for some weird reason. This is a black silky, you know. This is basically a show chicken. You know, there's no purpose in having a chicken like this running around in your barnyard. This chicken was he was catatonic is what he was when we were photographing him. He just never got up, you know. Sorry, you know. He probably looks wonderful, you know, if he's right, you know. And but look at this guy. Look at that, the Derbyshire redcap. Look at that comb on this guy. You know, you could just tell when he walked around. You know, he's a proud guy. You know, he really likes strutting his stuff. This is the glamorous life of a photographer. Back in some back barn, you know, where we can find it, you know. But I was assisted by the chicken whisperers, Jim and the guy there at the farm, you know. And Jim got really good, you know. You can put your finger right underneath the chicken's chin like this, you know, and just raise it up, and the chicken will go, and then you go, and they stay there for just a second, you know. This is the kind of stuff we learn to do, you know. There's yet one more thing we need to save. We need to save not just all the domesticated ones. We probably need to save huge amounts of the land races, the wild cousins, all these other plants and animals that they came from, because if you can't find, like UG99, if you can't find that resistance in a domesticated variety of wheat. Then you're going to go to the wild cousins, which will make it tougher, but you can do it. And if you can't find it there, then you're going to go to the land races, which will be much tougher, but it can be done. And if the world population depends on it, you're probably going to try. So their goal at Q has been to save 10% of the world's plant species by 2010. They reached it in 2009 with 24,200 species in their seed bank. They concentrate on non-domesticated varieties, and it is absolutely a world class resource for wild relatives of plants. This kind of stuff. Plants you never heard of, probably devil's claw. You know devil's claw, but you don't know why. It's used to treat the pain of pregnancy, and also as a mousetrap in Madagascar. I mean, we think we know what we want all this stuff for, you know, and then you find people doing all these weird things all over the world. Kapok, you know. This was, you know, that's why they called life vests in World War II kapoks, you know, because it was filled with this stuff. African mahogany, it's used to make botanical jewelry, you know. Brazil nuts, you know Brazil nuts, all right. Sacred lotus, poisoned. Castor oil, the bane of all kids in the 1940s and 50s. Looking glass mangrove, beautiful, beautiful things, really. You know, stunningly, look at this stuff. A seed wrap in blue, probably the only plant around that has that. And then this stuff, which I thought was just, the seeds of it were absolutely beautiful, the way this thing pulled apart and these beautiful transparent seeds came out. It's an anti-inflammatory. I mean, all these things are just like the diversity that we know of from the rainforest, except people have been growing these around the world for various reasons. So finally, I want to take you just on one last little journey here into Ethiopia to see a crop named teff. I know teff is hardly known in the United States. It's grown some. You can probably find it here. It's used to make injera, that bread of Ethiopia. Anybody had injera? A fair amount? Yeah, well, we're in San Francisco. Yeah, and out in Kansas, I could do that, and no, nobody knows. So here we are harvesting teff there. This is a plant that hardly anybody outside Ethiopia knows about, but is vastly important in that one particular place. This is, and it's wonderful because it is highly drought resistant. It grows well. This is, so I followed it through Ethiopia, going to the market where they were selling it. Cheetahs Muhammad, when she was mixing injera in her kitchen. And then Hawa Yesuf when she was out cooking it in this, this little kitchen out back of the house. And then Jamal Muhammad surprised me. He had his own seed bank. He started pulling out these plastic containers and ceramic vessels, and he had his own seed bank. He had gone through the starvation and the famine in the 1980s in Ethiopia. He'd lost family members. He knew what happened, and it wasn't going to happen to him again. And so just in his back room, he had his own seed bank. He'd learned that lesson that, like the intelligent tinkerer, you keep all the parts. You keep those things that can save you in bad times. Those women there, Ansha Said and Said Shifaran, there at this farmer seed bank, their farmers, were very, very proud that they had their own seed bank, that they could take care of themselves and have some assurance that they would survive. Because it's these people this is what this is really about. These people, this woman walking home in Ethiopia, and she's carrying 7 varieties of sorghum on her back. They grow that many. They eat them directly for dinner. That little girl walking beside her is what? 3, 4? She's already learning to carry home that sorghum on her back. It is being passed on right now. These people are very directly dependent upon it. And if we think about it, we are too. That's why Carrie Fowler is carrying those seeds into that Svalbard Global Seed Vault. That's why we're saying we need to keep all of those heirlooms for our future, and not just the short term, but the long term. And 10,000 years isn't a bad time to think about. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you, Stewart.
Let's go have a seat.
Yeah. Thanks for going on that journey with me. It's always fun to get back out there and see all those folks. Kind of like open up my album.
We always envied the National Geographic photographers, and now we know why. Can't wait for your next story. What is your next story? What are you working on?
Let's see, next story. Well, I just got done with the King James Bible. That was
current issue.
I'll probably be doing a story on Neolithic archaeology in Orkney. Or maybe one on the new interpretations of the Bronze Age.
So Neolithic archaeology means you'll be looking at them doing their agricultural revolution, or?
Could be. That was a fascinating. Actually, they're up and down the west coast of Europe. There are about 4 centers of the sort of the metropolises of the Neolithic age, and Orkney's one of them, and it's just loaded with cairns and monuments and stone circles and villages from that era, and it's a wonderful place to tell the story of the Neolithic age. Yeah.
Question from George Post. In view of the recent reanimation of a 32,000-year-old plant from permafrost in northern Russia, will we see a revision of the entire concept of heirloom species? Bring back the extinct, whatever it is, potato?
Yeah, that was an interesting one today, wasn't it? Yesterday that came about. My interpretation of that was that this was a very rare occurrence that they were able to find that. But every once in a while you're going to get a chance to do something like that. More important to me is the large scale of we've got things sitting in jars in seed banks that need to be saved. There's the wonderful story, by the way, of the Vavilov Institute in Russia, and Vavilov was perhaps one of the first seed savers. He's the guy who went to Ethiopia and mapped out many of these seeds and had this great seed vault in Russia. During the Stalinist era, he fell out of favor with the Stalinists because he refused to go along with their genetic bunk, and was sent off.
He was vocally anti-Lysenko?
Yeah, I think so, as I have the story. And so he gets sent off to a gulag prison. And the fascinating story about it is that during World War II, during the siege of Leningrad, his staff there at the seed bank, a number of them starved to death with bags of seed still sitting on their desk. They refused to eat the seeds because they so believed that they were saving them for the future, that they starved at their desk rather than eat the grain.
Were they successful? Were those seeds in fact saved?
That is the sad part that I was wanting to get to. The woman that I talked to at Ames, Iowa, said that the sad part is that today probably half of the seeds in the Vavilov collection are no longer viable. And it is simply that whole expensive, difficult business of you got to keep growing them out, you have to keep replacing the seeds and recycling them.
So you say 7 to 20 years. What happens is like after the period of time,
viability goes down. They won't spread.
Half and then a quarter, and then
right. Yeah,
next to nothing.
Lower and lower. I mean, it isn't an all-in-once thing that that at 21 years it's no good anymore. It's just that the viability goes down and eventually gets to the place that they just will not. They will not grow.
Well, does cold help? I mean, it
Cold
clearly
helps.
helped with this particular plant from 32,000.
Cold helps, and that is why they're going into that seed bank in the Arctic, is because it is naturally cold below freezing back in that mountain, and they cool it further. But even if the electricity goes off, that will stay cold for a long time and aid in the longevity of those plants. However, you have to say that not all seeds need the same temperature and the same conditions for maximum storage. So this is a bit of a compromise, putting them all into one vault at one temperature. So,
Question from Forrest, looks like Pound. What do you think of efforts to breed perennial wheat again by crossing annuals with inedible perennial grass? Your neighbor, I guess, Wes Jackson.
You betcha. Wes Jackson. You mentioned him in your you went across that in your book. Right. You're talking about some of the efforts, at least one of the efforts, and that's at the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas, which is about 15 miles from where I live. Wes Jackson is a MacArthur Fellow, is working on not just wheat, but perennial grains that don't have to be replanted every year, basically that you could harvest the prairie. And so that you're not plowing all the time, you're not having all of the erosion associated with that cultivation, and you get ideally you would have a polyculture. You wouldn't have just one plant. So that you have this natural resistance. If you have a dry year, the dry hardy things come on. If you have a wet year, the other ones come on, and you just harvest the whole thing. It's one of the technologies that has great promise of answering a particular problem in agriculture.
Now, Wes has been blasting away for about 30 years on those things. Does he?
Wes is a character, isn't he?
Do any of his young staffers?
Anybody read his books? Anybody Wes Jackson's books? Yeah,
of course,
good.
The San Francisco.
He's a great guy.
Wes has been here, and Wes always comes here.
Would you say curmudgeon?
I would say curmudgeon. He comes here and he says, California is so beautiful. God, the sky and the weather and the ocean, all that stuff. It's easy to find beauty in color. In Kansas, you got to work to find the beauty. It's not easy. But, okay, there he is, blasting away for 3 decades or so. Surely some of his...
On what grounds?
On doing his Land Institute, right? So trying to get the roots deeper and deeper, and there's these beautiful photographs of perennial plants that have roots that go down to there, whereas all these little annual plants are just little surface things. Well, there must be some young staffers at the Land Institute who are secretly genetically engineering.
Do you mean actually, replacing genes?
Replacing genes and gene splicing, gene swapping, all that stuff to get the thing to happen in a little shorter than 30 years.
I don't think anybody at the Land Institute is doing that. But it's certainly tempting to short circuit the process. I think Wes would tell you that it isn't necessary. Wouldn't he? Yeah.
Oh God, one wants to just race.
By the way, this is have you ever, the genetic engineering world?
I do. We got Drew Endy right down here. He's not only genetic engineering, he's into synthetic biology, which is the next level.
I had a fun experience. This is the kind of fun stuff that I get to do when I was doing a story on genetic engineering. I always wondered, you see, because you've seen this illustration about genetic engineering. You take the gene from the jellyfish, and you put it over into the corn or something like that, So, and there's always this arrow, right? There's the arrow. Here's the jellyfish on the one side of the illustration, and there's a corn on the other side, and there's this arrow, And I always wondered, how does that arrow work? And that's my job in stories like this, is to figure out, how does that arrow work? How do you do that? So I went looking, and I found out that there's such a thing as a gene gun. You know what anybody seen a gene gun? Anybody? You know what a gene gun is? Okay, they're very cool. So, and it turns out that there are 38 caliber gene guns and 22 caliber gene guns. And I'm not kidding.
That's great. They go bang?
They do. You wear earmuffs. So what happened was there was a researcher at Cornell who invented this. And he goes into his colleague's office one day and he says, how much energy do you think it would take to take this little titanium pellet, he's nodding his head, I'm on the right track, coated with genes, and shoot it through the cell wall of a plant and have it stop inside the cell and not go out the other side? And the guy said, well, I don't know, but we could figure it out. And so they went and got a Crossman air pistol. And I'm not kidding. And this was the first gene gun. And they put these little pellets inside the Crossman air pistol, and they pump it up 2 times, and they pump it up 4 times, and they point it at a potato, and blam! They shoot it, you see? And then what you do, of course, in this business is you cut up the potato and you put that in a petri dish and you tissue culture grow it out. You see, and this is the first one. So and you don't know exactly how it's going to happen, where the gene's going to go in, and so there is a bit of diciness here. And so when I was doing this story, I wanted to go find a gene gun. And that wasn't easy, you know. But I finally did at Cornell. I found one, and it was a .38 caliber gene gun, and I was able to take a picture of it, you know. And that was a great eureka moment for me in doing that story.
The Society for the Protection of Cruelty to Potatoes
That's
is
right,
not going to like
that.
this story.
Exactly.
You'll be glad to know that that's still done, of course, and it's one common way to do this.
There are other ways, but yeah, but that's still done.
One that's come along that's looking very promising is the zinc finger nucleases, where you can basically go in at the level of a single base pair, swap out this base pair and put in the other base pair exactly where it was.
You know where you're going to do it.
Yeah, so genome editing coming along now. They don't have to use a gun anymore. But, you know, progress moves on. The inevitable question, and I'll ask it, Ellen Burke asked it, how great a threat is Monsanto to heirlooms? That compresses quite a lot into an assumption there.
That depends. But I mean, and I did this story on genetically engineered foods, and I was a great skeptic at the time, and I still think there are things to be cautious about. But I would say that Monsanto is in that regard, as that question is stated there. Okay, Monsanto is a much lesser threat to heirlooms than plain old industrial agriculture, where the whole dairy industry depends on about 2 or 3 breeds of cattle. The whole turkey industry depends on 2 breeds of turkeys. You know, yes, there is danger of that. For instance, I went up and I photographed old Percy Schmeiser up in Canada, who was growing oilseed rape, and so I looked at that very carefully. There is some danger of that. There is the danger, for instance, of, well, this isn't Monsanto, but you genetically modify salmon as they do, you know, and then the salmon get out, and the modified gene takes over from the wild gene, and all of a sudden you don't have any wild salmon left, and that can happen relatively quickly. So there are definitely things to be worried about. In the context of heirlooms, you know, we've already seen the boogeyman, and Monsanto in that realm is a minor boogeyman compared to other processes.
So there's a version of that question Chris Lombardi asked, do you think genetic engineering is helping or hindering future diversity? I was talking with Drew Endy, you know, in this decade or the next, genetic engineering is coming to the garden shed. It's already in the garage.
It is. Yep.
And you know, one of the things you showed with heirlooms is vast and wild rambunctiousness and just amazingness. People want to make potatoes look as weird as pure pig shit, you know, as weird as. So they've been doing that anyway through the long, hard process of breeding. Presumably they're going to go totally bananas as soon as they can start doing it gene by gene.
Yes, but you have to go get that gene someplace. You're going to
seed banks.
There you go. You still need that bank of seeds because we're not quite that clever yet to figure out how to do the trait we want. We generally still go back to that seed bank, and we get a hold of that gene with a certain trait, and we don't invent it ourselves. We find it and insert it. And in that regard, actually, the whole business of understanding, and this is a very complex field too, understanding where all that diversity is and collecting more of it. You see, because like Q is out there still collecting. You know, the people are still go out and looking for wild land races and wild cousins of crops and everything. That is actually increasing the amount of diversity we have at our disposal. Not the actual amount of diversity, but the amount that we have at our disposal. So in that regard, if those genes become valuable and more money goes into the search, then that increases diversity. So that's a wishy-washy answer, but that's as good as you're going to get.
Well, it's a nice, one of our previous speakers was Pamela Ronald, who works with rice at UC Davis in genetic engineering. And she's developed a rice that holds its breath underwater for 2 weeks, so it's a flood-tolerant rice. Where did she get the genes to do that? They got it from a wild-ass variety of, no, it doesn't come from a roundworm or a shark or something like that. It comes from another variety, but it could. But it comes from another variety of rice that was preserved. That was not particularly tasty. It was in a whole different part of India than Bangladesh, where for example, where the floods are. But because it was preserved, they were able to get this flood tolerance, and they were never able to breed it into the really tasty rice. But it wasn't hard to basically precision breed it with genetic engineering. And now they have this flood tolerant tasty rice, and it's taking off in Bangladesh. It's a good story. And it's a story that combines genetic engineering and this kind of banking that I think is part of where we're going.
And that's what really almost always happens.
Here's a good question from Laura Welcher. Saving the world's heirlooms seems dependent on saving our knowledge about them, their names, stories, uses. They show what's going on with these land races are, which, by the way, means saving languages and cultures and things which are pretty fragile and are themselves often going extinct. How do you deal with that?
The example, the place that I went in Peru is the potato park, and Parque de la Papa. I hope I'm saying that close to right. And basically what has happened there is that there are 7 villages that in this valley that have gone together and made a concerted effort to bring back the potatoes. They were down to about 400 varieties of potatoes, but many of their varieties of potatoes had been saved to a seed bank down in Lima, I think that's right, Lima, and now they're being brought back to that valley. That is a prime example of, yes, how you have to save the culture as well as the stories and the language, because if there's no one who actively uses those potatoes, there's going to be no one who grows them. I mean, that's a stupid sounding corollary, but it's exactly the case, and it's why people in the livestock, say the RBS, it's the Royal Society for Preservation of Breeds, RSPB, says you have to eat them to save them. They have to be actually useful to someone, and in that regard, then you have to do things like you have to have butchers who will cut them up for you, because large scale packing plants are really disassembly plants, and they only want specific breeds. They want steers that have bones of a certain length, because they're set up to disassemble those factory cows. So if you're going to raise these breeds, not only do you have to say the language and the culture and all that, you have to have people who will butcher them, who will market them, who will, all those kind of things. Yes.
So Lisa Bartlett wonders, what can we do to be saving these various things? It sounds like we have to eat whatever the cow is, find it and eat it.
Yeah. Well, that doesn't hurt. Yeah. Actually, that doesn't hurt. So I would say the first thing is be smart. Be smart. You don't actually necessarily have to do anything, but when when some stupid politician wants to cut funding for these seed banks, because why the hell are we saving 200,000 varieties of wheat when we only need one, you know, you can be the person who stands up at that town hall meeting and says, wait a minute, it doesn't work that way. I mean, that's the first thing. If you want to do something actively, go join Seed Savers or Native Seed Search or something, and grow them out. You know, one of the reasons that Seed Savers has all these plants is that their members have been growing all these vegetables in their gardens. It is such a wonderful example of community citizen participation in the effort.
So is this seed, you mentioned members, so they're members of this Seed Saver organization.
Seed Savers, yeah.
And they get the seeds and they grow them, and then they save the seeds and send them back and all that stuff.
Right, and being a member means that you share your seeds. So you're going out these, well, Grandpa Ott's morning glories or whatever, and you're collecting seeds, and those go back to the Seed Savers Exchange and made available to other members. The catalog is wonderful. I mean, of course, aren't all seed catalogs wonderful? You know, really, you know, I mean, it is such an optimistic time of the year, isn't it?
That's how you get through the winter, is looking those colorful seed catalogs.
You get this catalog and you see yourself as a new, fresh person who's going to do things, you know, and you're going to grow these tomatoes and you're going to be healthy, you know, and cultured. But yeah, I mean, there are these wonderful varieties of things, and there are a number of these organizations around, and so if you're not in the Midwest, there might be heavier on that. There's some in New England, they're in the Southwest. You know, you can find them that have the kinds of things that you want, and it's a cooperative effort.
Yeah, so is this one to many and the many to one, or to the many people that are growing these various seeds and swap them among themselves?
You can do that too. I mean, it works actually. You know, you do find that breeds are kept alive in just exactly that way. Innumerable varieties of vegetables are here because somebody brought the seeds with them when they came over from the old world.
So this raises the question of soil. Can you talk about soil? Seed interaction, native soils are also in decline. I'm not sure what that means. If you think of the soil as the womb of the seed, is that an issue here? And you did that, the whole story on soils. What's the relation of soils and land races?
Yeah, and that's another it's another great realm of you know, of these issues that are critical but generally seen as boring, you know, and our understanding of what's going on in the soil is paltry, frankly. We don't know what's going on. We don't know how it works. If we think we understand that we need water, and we think we understand that we need clean air, then go back down to the level of soil and think that all life on Earth depends on this stuff that is only a few inches to maybe, if you're lucky, a few feet thick. I mean, just this top, which is actually some sort of, and I believe, some sort of living organism, some sort of living productive being, and we have to, not only do we have to have it, if we're going to prosper for the long term, and I think you're in that business, we've got to get better at it, you know, and not only do we have to preserve it, we have to figure out, you know, what we have been doing that has been so destructive and stop it, and then how to be better partners with it and not simply ignore it.
Famously, historically, many a culture has gone, many empire has gone down when they when they used up their soil.
You know, the tragedy that's going on in Syria today is echoed because I've been there. There are the dead cities in that area around Aleppo, which were hundreds of abandoned villages and small towns and cities there. And as in Byzantine times, they were flourishing communities. And now they are surrounded by karst formation stone, which basically means that there was topsoil there only, what, 1,300 years ago, something like that. Yeah, and it's all gone. You know, and there are those stories all over the world. The Burren of Ireland. If you've been to Ireland, that's another one.
Question from Owen: does permaculture and I guess polyculture contribute to plant and animal diversity better than monoculture? Do you see things moving in that direction, away from monoculture toward what's called permaculture or polyculture? You saw a lot of that.
Almost anything's better than monoculture. Yeah.
But there you are in Kansas. Come on. You going to do polyculture in Kansas?
No, we're not very much.
In Iowa?
But
Oh, you can't with the grasses.
The question as stated is implying that it's either permaculture or monoculture. Monoculture meaning, yeah, you do wheat from my home to western to the border of Kansas, you know, and it's all the same variety and all that. But there is vast territory between that extreme and permaculture, which is a very particular kind of, I'm traipsing on my ignorance here of saying that it's organic necessarily, but
aesthetically, I'm sure it tries to be. Yeah, right.
And then there's a whole range of options in between, and yes, I mean, but basically the most fundamental things is there are stupid ways of doing things and smart ways of doing things. Even if you're doing monoculture, there are smarter ways of doing things. Yeah. And the real profit comes from getting smarter.
Hear, hear. Final question from Bruce. Did you find any new food types just beginning the journey to acceptance and
I tell you, I don't know that I can answer that question exactly, but one of the interesting things about this is that virtually all of those domesticated breeds of particularly grains, and livestock that we depend upon were developed by Neolithic people, Stone Age people. Virtually none of them. There are just virtually no examples of modern agriculture with all its wonders domesticating anything new. And that's really quite surprising. Almost everything that we depend upon was done, and you saw the years, 4,000 to 10, 12,000 years ago, and we have domesticated virtually nothing new since. And that's quite a testament to
okay,
those,
so
the
let's pick an
intelligence of
animal.
those people living at that time.
What animal would you like to domesticate?
I would say magazine editors. They're
no hope
tough
there.
one.
But the thing about it,
animals to domesticate. You know, they're working on domesticating foxes.
Funnily enough, that just came to my mind. What's the idea there? A niftier kind of dog?
I think
or what?
they're going to see if we figure out how to do it. But but it is interesting that the people have pet foxes now. My God, I mean, they've basically figured out, you know, the breeding to take a wild fox and make it a domesticated. That probably is one of the new rare examples of a new domesticated breed. I think
mountain lions. What do you think?
Probably not. No, yeah.
Why not? A little precision breeding. You probably
yeah. There you
take
go.
a little bit of a tabby cat, put it in the mountain lion, and now you got. I once lived with a cheetah who was friendly in Africa, and being with a large cat whose purr you can hear from 100 feet away.
Right.
And which, you know, roars behind your head when you lay with your head on his belly. I think large cats are going to be very attractive. Owls, if we could domesticate owls and, you know, train them to go after the rodents in the garden.
There you go, yeah.
That would be helpful. And, you know, interesting things to do at night with your owls.
Curiously, as a...
I'm a forecaster by trade. I forecasted that in this decade, to our mixture of delight and horror, we were going to see new domesticated animals. Some of them for food, but mostly for delight, I think.
Curiously, if you look at cheetahs, you mentioned cheetahs, okay? And you have all probably seen these wonderful pictures of cheetahs that are up on the hood. You know, somebody's out there, and they're in this Land Rover out there, and there's a cheetah up on the hood, okay? there was one family of cheetahs that was raised. I'm kidding, I'm not kidding. There was one family of cheetahs that was raised, and that particular family of cheetahs is in virtually all those pictures. Yes.
I may know the cheetah.
Yes, you probably don't want to know all that stuff, but there you go. It just in more general terms, I think one of the great lessons is this is not something where we necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. We have to not throw away the wheel.
Here, here.
And there are things that we need to solve new problems. This is not necessarily we need to solve a new problem. We need to keep the answers that we already figured out. So,
what I like, and we're going to have a talk shortly from Edward O. Wilson, who invented the term biodiversity. In a sense, you're making the case for agricultural biodiversity. Mm-hmm. And that sounds like such a damn clear, attractive goal that we all want to help. Thank you.
Yeah, you betcha. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.